Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video, I actually just want to have a discussion about corrupted gear. Corrupted gear has been a little bit of a hot button issue for anybody playing World of Warcraft right now, and I have my own opinions on it, so I just kind of wanted to voice them in this video. So I hope you guys enjoy the footage in the background, but this is mostly just me talking about corruptions. Before we really dive into corruptions themselves, let me remind you that Blizzard right now is working on Shadowlands, and my honest opinion is, and I think a lot of us can agree, I don't want them to do anything for Battle for Azeroth. Nothing at all. I would actually prefer for Blizzard to dedicate all of their time, if not 100% of their time, onto Shadowlands. Battle for Azeroth has a brand new raid that's been out for quite a bit. Only a handful of guilds have got to kill Mythic N'Zoth, so people are going to be doing that for a while. The Season 4 Mythic Pluses have literally just started, and the Arena season is still, more or less, is in its infancy. The content still has a lot of its shine on it for quite a bit, and it's going to keep us busy for quite a little bit of time. So I think it's perfectly fine as it is. If Blizzard wants to adjust a couple things, buff a couple things, nerf a couple things, that'd be fine, but for the most part, I don't want them putting any more effort into Battle for Azeroth. And they even mentioned that they're not going to have a patch 8.3.5, where a lot of people were hoping the Blizzard would add something like account-bound essences, which I think this should eventually implement as without needing to make a whole 8.3.5, just at one point be like, okay, I think Battle for Azeroth has got, let's say, like 2 more months left in it. Here we go, account-wide essences for everybody, go have fun, play your alts, figure out what class you want to play before the next expansion. And as for me right now, I feel like the corruption system to replace the Titanforge system for the environment that we are in Battle for Azeroth is not a bad system to hold us off until Shadowlands. Mind you, it's not a perfect system, but it's not a completely the worst thing in the world type of system. Let's talk about some of the positives that corruptions bring into the game. And I'm also going to talk about the negatives, but let's start with the positives first. And this is the stuff that I believe that corruption does well. I think it's a better system than RNG item level increases. Corruption itself, whether it's good or not, it is better than just a random item just being a little bit higher in item level. I mean, that just sounds really boring, let's be honest. Just a randomly item Titanforge or Warforge now is just a couple little numbers higher than it normally would be. It is definitely not an impactful system that makes you really think. And I think the corruption system does do better than random item level increases is it does replace one of the issues we had before. Let's say you have some player that just, let's say, maybe not good at the game, and they do LFR, compared to somebody who does, let's say, Mythic raiding, and the LFR player ends up getting a trinket, the same trinket you can unlock on, let's say, the first boss in Mythic. And for whatever reason, the LFR player's trinket Titan forges, Giga forges, and it's actually a higher item level than the person going to do the Mythic as a base item level. I think that was insane. That was crazy, where people were doing the easiest of content and getting the fattest upgrades on a piece of loot at a complete random. This forced players to actually try to go for a normal, heroic, mythic, as well as LFR if you wanted to have a chance for a piece of gear to Titanforge, and even start doing every world quest under the sun. The corruption gear at least scales to the item level, and we don't have random item level increases anymore in gear, which is nice. It's at least one RNG system that was fixed. Again, not perfect, but I do like that corruption does do this better than Titanforging. 2. I also think that corruptions do not have a completely RNG chance of dropping, as in you gotta do every bit of content for a chance to drop. There are some guaranteed drops on a corruption, not a specific one, but a corruption piece. For example, your PvP chests at the end of the week for Cap and Conquest, just about everybody can do that, even without stepping inside of an arena. There's a Mythic Plus chest, which can be done on a +2 keystone, which is very easy, all the way to a 15, and does scale with the item level. And of course, there's certain bosses and their loot tables include gear that is corrupted, mostly weapons, with specific corruptions that are 100% chance to guarantee if it does drop from the boss. So everybody's saying that corruption is completely RNG and you gotta do every single world quest in order to get one. There are certain cases where you can just do something weekly and you'll have a guaranteed corruption at the end of the week. Corruptions also is a band-aid fix, we can all agree. It's very similar to essences. Essences enhance your class or spec in various different ways without buffing your class and spec. At this point on, I told you before, I don't want Blizzard working on BFA whatsoever. So that means if Blizzard is not going to be working on BFA, they probably shouldn't be working on class redesigns. They probably should be doing all that for Shadowlands. But these corruptions are like essences. They enhance certain parts of our spec, and in some cases, certain specs are able to use certain corruptions better than others in order to create some sort of a play style for it. So I do like the fact that it's a band-aid that works for every single class, and it can apply and make anybody viable. Like if you get stars on Enhancement Shaman, infinite stars on a class or spec that's generally not that great for single target, not often brought to bosses, but now you're able to giga stack a bunch of haste on your Enhancement Shaman, and now you're competitive with some of the top tier demon hunters in the game. I think something like this can be exciting because it does vary and can influence the styles and the gear changes and stat changes that come from certain corruptions. Also, other sources of damage besides class does help certain classes and specs that are generally not that good a bit more viability. When's the last time you've seen a subtlety rogue or a feral druid inside of a raid, but a corruption might be able to fix it, a corruption that they might have to change a few stats for, and now all of a sudden that spec is finally visible. You also have corruption management, which is kind of cool. You know, you're just trying to make sure the number is low. And this early into the expansion, you know, we only have so much corruption resistance, but by the time we have a fully upgraded cloak, it's going to be much easier. But early days corruption management is kind of cool. It actually does create a meaningful choice. It also offers you a different playstyle based on a corruption. For example, and not all specs are included, for my Outlaw rogue I got infinite stars. And that means the game wants me to stack a trait that I never would have stacked before, Brigand's Blitz. It's a trait where upon using a Adrenaline Rush, you'll get a stack in buff for haste, and eventually it'll reach 10 stacks, and it'll give you just a bunch of haste. And now I actually want to stack this trait, and normally haste is awful for Outlaw. It is too much haste, it gives me too much energy, I can never spend that energy. But because infinite stars work so well off of haste, I'm able to take all that haste from all that Azeroth gear that I can get from all those traits, and I'm able to make a different playstyle. So now I'm playing actually a different build of Outlaw than I played in the last tier, which I always like. I like when the spec and changes are happening all the time. I feel like most of us have played the same trades, the same talents for how many patches now, and it's nice to see something new, something different. Not every spec is gonna see this, but some definitely will. You also have tanks that now have a bit bigger game to play with some corruptions that are all about percentage health. Even healers are able to now make different hybrid builds where they do a bit more damage, or they can choose to do more damage based on the corruptions that they run. So I like how it actually changes up the meta and the gameplay. And these are all the things that I found positive about corruptions. I went for a pretty long list, but this is everything that I like about them. However, there is a flip side to every story. Let's talk about things I don't think corruptions do well. It's RNG what corruption you get. Whether you open it from a Mythic Plus chest, PvP chest, from a raid loot, sometimes you'll just, even if you have a guaranteed corruption from your MM Plus, it is completely RNG what you get. Some people will get stars, some people will get different procs, some people will just get a random haste buff, other people will get weird corruptions like Leech. And how can you apply Leech on a DPS unless you just want to do some self-healing build, which is not going to make you do more damage. So, certain corruptions, and the fact that it's RNG, does make a lot of people frustrated. It isn't fixing the issue of classes either, and we talked about it before. I don't want Blizzard to start working on BFA and fixing classes for Battle for Azeroth. I'd rather let all those class changes happen in Shadowlands, but still, it doesn't help to what your class does best when you're leveling a character, when you got a fresh 110, without the corruptions, without the traits, without the essences, classes still can feel like crap to play. It also feels that your class doesn't really do that much damage, but rather your corruption does damage. And a lot of people have found themselves to dislike this aspect of corruptions. Like now your character has a corruption, like summons a tentacle and it will mind flay the enemy, and now it feels like your character is just there to summon these tentacles instead of being a powerful Frost Death Knight obliterating your enemies. No, now you're kind of just like a tentacle summoner. Which I understand why some people might not enjoy that. They'd rather see their character do damage rather than a trinket or another item do a majority of their DPS. Also, sometimes people simply just get unlucky with all the corruptions, like constantly unlucky. You may be able to get 3 bracers back to back to back and just get the worst items on them possible. And that can definitely feel very annoying. But these are more my opinions of what I think are the positives and negatives of corruptions. You guys might have others, and if you want to share them in the comments, I'd love to read them. I do like the fact that the meta has changed a little bit, and there's gameplay changes with these corruptions. It is a system that Blizzard is continuing to manage even right now. They nerf certain corruptions that are just way too good, way too powerful, and they are continuing to buff certain corruptions that are just underperforming. Of course, each spec and each class is going to be different. So for one class, maybe Infinite Stars is insanely lucrative. For another, maybe it's one of the worst choices and you will want to get something that just increases your overall stats, like Haste, Critical Strike, Mastery. So Blizzard is going to try to nerf him and buff him in a more generic setting, trying to kind of hit all the bases if at all possible, but it's not going to please everybody, as again, every class interacts in interesting ways. I also think that patience with corruptions is a virtue. For anybody that's complaining about corruptions, but mostly complaining about the fact that you don't have a good one yet, that's the thing. You don't have a good one yet. The more weeks we go into Mythic Pluses, the more chests we get to open from our PvP and M+ chests, the more times we get to step into the raid and do some of the base content, the more opportunities we'll have for different gear to corrupt. So again, this is not everybody that's complaining about corruptions, and this isn't the biggest issue with corruptions, but a handful of people are talking about, man, I wish I had the best in slot corruptions. That's the only reason I'm not doing well. Well, if there is a corruption that's going to be best in slot for you, you will eventually get it. We're only a little bit of a month into this new patch, and even less than that for some of the gear rewards. I think this Tuesday should be a month for the actual gear rewards themselves. So there's still a lot of opportunity before this patch 8.3 is over, before people will get some of the corruptions that they will find useful, or even might be ones that are going to be best in slot. Maybe Blizzard could add some sort of a corruption vendor, but again, I don't really want them to take any work from Shadowlands to focus on BFA in any measure, but that could be a viable strategy. I also like how it changes the meta for PvP. That's one of the things that some people are gonna like, some people are not, so I feel like the comments might be 50-50 whether they agree with me or not. But I do like the fact that PvP is now more focused on high damage, rather than all about tank trinkets. I was not a huge fan of the tank trinket meta, and especially I saw this in the 5.5.1 duels, and I'm glad that Blizzard nerfed a lot of those tank trinkets. For DPS classes to be DPS focused, I'm fine with that. But for DPS classes to be tank oriented, to really just outlast the enemy and have increased amount of self-healing forever, that to me personally just was not fun. I'd rather have the games be quicker. I'd rather have the DPS doing damage dealing rather than DPS sitting there and tanking up as best as you can and games going into really high dampening. And again, a lot more things that Blizzard could do to really take dampening out of the game. Originally it was a band-aid, but that again talks about changing how classes work, changing how systems work, and I'd rather leave most of that for Shadowlands. But I do like the faster paced game. If I had to choose between two metas, one where it's all about tank items and tank trinkets, or two where it's all about corruptions and fast paced damage, I think I would prefer corruptions. But in a perfect scenario, we wouldn't have to choose either one. Corruptions are not perfect for PvP. Again, they're just a system that's going to be there, and maybe Blizzard will continue some sort of a fragmented version of corruptions. Maybe something like this will make it into Shadowlands in the smallest possible way. You know, maybe stuff like slightly faster movement speed, slightly faster mana regeneration, slightly faster health regeneration, but that's about it. So I think they are, they put up the whole corruption system. They probably are going to find a way to reuse it in a future expansion. Could be in Shadowlands, but they're definitely not going to make it nearly as impactful as corruptions are right now. But what I'm trying to say though is, in my perfect, best possible expansion for World of Warcraft, if Shadowlands were to be the best possible fictional expansion that is going to be a 10 out of 10, an 11 out of 10 in my head, we wouldn't have either one of those systems. We would have something better, something bigger, but not something I can really communicate even with words. I don't know what this idea would be because I haven't actually had to sit down and think what would be the best system, but I do trust Blizzard. I think there's a lot of data that has been collected from previous expansions. I feel like if you have a system similar to Legion with a bit of that RNG for gear, but not enough to the point where, wow, you just get a best in slot piece, something amazing, but some sort of RNG in gear, I think it's fine as long as it doesn't make some insanely huge impact into your class, into just how much damage you do or how effective you start being all of a sudden. Or maybe take all the RNG out of the game completely and just let it be all about systems with predetermined loot, predetermined pieces, and the only RNG that should be there is whether you got that piece or not. We don't know. We'll see what Blizzard will end up doing. But these are my thoughts on corruptions. I just wanted to let you guys know my thoughts on it. What are you guys' thoughts on corruptions? Do you think they're good? Do you not like them? What are you feeling about them? And thank you guys so much for watching. Maybe this video changed some of you guys' minds. Maybe you guys will change my minds in the comments. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see all of you in another video.